The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Judge Harmon's voice echoed against the mahogany walls. Richard Collins' smirk vanished, replaced by a pallor that drained the color from his tanned face. 20 years of marriage dissolved with his signature on those divorce papers, his ticket to freedom and his young girlfriend's waiting arms. Or so he thought. If you're captivated by tales of justice served when you least expect it, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us karma always collects its debts. In accordance with the last will and testament of Eleanor Collins' father, Harold Whitman, dated 3 months before his death and only to be revealed upon dissolution of the marriage between Eleanor and Richard Collins. Judge Harmon adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing at Richard. The sum of $28 million, previously believed to have been left equally to both parties, was in fact placed in a special trust with explicit conditions. Eleanor sat motionless beside her attorney, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. 6 months of bitter divorce proceedings had hollowed her cheeks and dimmed the light in her eyes. At 52, she had believed her life was ending along with her marriage. Richard had made sure she felt that way. "I don't understand," Richard interrupted, standing abruptly. "We settled Hal's estate years ago." "Sit down, Mr. Collins," Judge Harmon commanded. This document was authenticated and filed with the court by Mr. Whitman's estate attorney, to be revealed only at this precise moment. 23 years earlier, Eleanor had brought Richard home to meet her father. Harold Whitman was a shrewd businessman who had built a real estate empire from nothing. He had taken an immediate disliking to the charming young investment banker dating his only daughter. "He's after your inheritance," he had warned Eleanor. She had dismissed his concerns as overprotectiveness. They were in love. Richard couldn't possibly be interested in her family's wealth. When Harold passed away 5 years into their marriage, Richard had displayed appropriate grief. He had even delivered a moving eulogy at the funeral. But that night, Eleanor had caught him reviewing her father's will with undisguised interest. She had ignored the warning bell that sounded in her mind. Now, as Judge Harmon continued reading the document, Eleanor realized her father had never ignored that warning. He had merely waited for the right moment to sound the alarm. The trust stipulates that in the event of divorce initiated by Richard Collins, the entire sum reverts solely to Eleanor Whitman Collins, along with all accumulated interest and investments. Furthermore, any marital assets acquired through investment of these funds are to be considered direct derivatives of the trust and therefore not subject to division as communal property. Richard's attorney frantically shuffled through papers. "Your Honor, this contradicts established precedent for division of marital assets. My client has spent 2 decades growing those investments. Using funds that came with conditions, Counselor. Conditions your client agreed to when he signed the acceptance of inheritance." Judge Harmon held up another document. Mr. Collins' signature appears on page 12, paragraph 4, acknowledging these terms. Eleanor remembered the day Richard had signed those papers. He had barely glanced at them, eager to access the funds that would jumpstart his investment career. The career that had made him wealthy enough to believe he deserved a younger, more attractive wife now that Eleanor had served her purpose. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "This is preposterous. I built those investments from nothing." "From a 7-figure trust fund," Judge Harmon corrected. "And according to this will, you've now forfeited your right to those assets." Eleanor's life flashed before her eyes, not the past, but the future she had been dreading. The downsized apartment she had reluctantly agreed to take in the settlement. The part-time job she had applied for at the local library, hoping to make ends meet. The humiliation of running into Richard and his 28-year-old girlfriend Brittany at community functions. All of it dissolved as quickly as Richard's smirk had. Richard's face contorted with rage. He hissed, using the nickname he hadn't uttered in years, "You knew about this." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "I had no idea." And it was true. Her father had kept this final act of protection secret even from her. As the implications of the will sank in, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Richard Collins, who had arrived expecting to walk away with over $15 million and a clear conscience, would leave with only his personal belongings and the income from his firm, a firm that Eleanor now owned 60% of, according to the documents being reviewed. "This changes everything about our property settlement," Eleanor's attorney stated, barely concealing her satisfaction. Richard looked at Eleanor with newfound calculation in his eyes. She recognized that look. It was how he assessed investment opportunities, weighing potential returns. "Perhaps we've been hasty," he said, voice softening. "Maybe we should consider reconciliation." The suggestion hung in the air, insulting in its transparency. For 20 years, Eleanor had compromised, accommodated, and forgiven. She had overlooked the late nights at the office, the business trips that never quite aligned with hotel receipts, the gradual emotional withdrawal. She had believed her father was wrong about Richard, that love had been the foundation of their marriage. "No," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "The divorce proceeds." 3 months later, Eleanor sat on the terrace of her home, the home she had kept in the revised settlement, along with the vacation property in Napa Valley and majority ownership in Richard's investment firm. Across from her sat her father's attorney, Martin Feldman, a man in his 70s who had executed Harold Whitman's last wishes with precision. "He knew all along?" Eleanor asked, sipping her tea. Martin nodded. "Harold was an excellent judge of character. He saw something in Richard that concerned him, but he also knew you were in love. He decided to let you make your choice while ensuring you would be protected in the long run." "And the timing of revealing the will?" "Harold believed that if Richard truly loved you, the will would remain sealed forever. If not..." Martin gestured to their surroundings. "He wanted you to have the resources to rebuild." Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions, gratitude toward her father, sadness for the years wasted, but predominantly, a growing sense of possibility. At 52, she wasn't old. She had decades ahead of her, financial security, and a freedom she hadn't experienced since before her marriage. Richard's departure had left wounds, certainly. His affair with Brittany, which had begun 3 years earlier, not recently as he had claimed, had shattered her self-confidence. The revelation that he had diverted company funds to set up his post-divorce life had broken her trust in her own judgment. The knowledge that for years he had systematically isolated her from friends who might have supported her independence had left her feeling foolish. But wounds could heal. Eleanor had already reconnected with her college roommate, Janet, who had never liked Richard. She had joined the board of a local arts foundation, using her business acumen to help them secure sustainable funding. She had even started taking sailing lessons, fulfilling a dream Richard had always dismissed as impractical. Martin watched her with kind eyes. "Harold would be proud of you, you know. Not because of how the money worked out, but because you found your strength." Eleanor smiled, her first genuine smile in what felt like years. "I had it all along. I just forgot where I put it." 1 year after the divorce, Eleanor received an email from Richard. His relationship with Brittany had ended, spectacularly and publicly, when she realized his financial situation wasn't what he had promised. His attempts to start a competing investment firm had faltered without Eleanor's family connections and the reputation he had built using her father's initial investment. The email oscillated between veiled apologies and subtle suggestions that they might discuss their situation over dinner. Eleanor deleted it without responding. Instead, she focused on rebuilding the investment firm with a new emphasis on ethical practices and diversity in hiring. She established a foundation that provided business education to women re-entering the workforce after divorce or widowhood. She traveled to places Richard had always dismissed as unimportant, Thailand, New Zealand, Peru, and discovered a world much larger than the narrow society they had inhabited. When she occasionally ran into Richard at industry events, she greeted him with polite indifference. The man who had once dominated her world had shrunk to his actual size, just another middle-aged businessman trying to reclaim past glory. Sometimes she caught him watching her with a mixture of resentment and regret. She never returned his gaze for long. Her attention was reserved for the future, not the past. 5 years after the divorce, Eleanor sat in a different courtroom. This time, she wasn't there as a participant but as a supporter. Her foundation had backed legislation strengthening financial protection for spouses in divorces involving hidden assets or financial misconduct. The bill, named after her father, required more transparent financial disclosure during marriage dissolution. As she listened to testimonies from women and men who had been financially manipulated by former partners, Eleanor reflected on her journey. Her father's foresight had saved her from financial ruin, but many weren't so fortunate. The foundation she had established had already helped hundreds navigate the treacherous waters of divorce after long marriages. The Harold Whitman Act wouldn't exist without your advocacy, her attorney, now a close friend, whispered beside her. You've turned personal pain into public good. Eleanor squeezed her hand in silent gratitude. Later that evening, as Eleanor prepared for a foundation fundraiser, she stood before her mirror and truly saw herself. The woman who looked back wasn't defined by her marriage or divorce. She wasn't a victim or even a survivor. She was a builder, of businesses, of communities, of a life constructed according to her own blueprint. Her father had given her the tools, but she had done the building herself. At the fundraiser, a distinguished man with silver temples and kind eyes approached her. Dr. Thomas Bennett, a widower who had recently joined the Foundation's medical advisory board. They had spoken briefly at previous events, professional conversations that had gradually included more personal elements. I read your interview in Business Monthly, he said after greeting her. Your perspective on ethical wealth management was fascinating. Thank you, Eleanor replied. Though I suspect you're being kind. Most people find investment strategies rather dull. Not when they're explained as moral choices rather than simply mathematical ones. His eyes crinkled when he smiled. Your father would have been proud of that approach. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest at the mention of her father. Did you know him? We served on a hospital board together years ago. He spoke about you often, his brilliant daughter who could see the humanity behind the numbers. For a moment, Eleanor was transported back to childhood, sitting in her father's office as he explained why they invested in certain companies and not others. Money is just a tool, he had told her. The question is whether you're building something worthwhile with it. Would you like to hear more about him? She asked Thomas. Perhaps over dinner sometime? His smile broadened. I'd like that very much. As they continued talking, Eleanor realized something profound. The smirk that had fallen from Richard's face in that courtroom years ago hadn't just marked the end of one chapter in her life. It had signaled the beginning of a much better one, a life where she wasn't defined by someone else's perception of her value, but by her own understanding of her worth. Her father's hidden will had given her financial security, yes. But the true inheritance had been the chance to rediscover herself, to rebuild not just her bank accounts, but her sense of purpose, her connections to others, and ultimately, her capacity for joy. And that, Eleanor reflected as she laughed at something Thomas said, was a legacy worth more than all the millions in the world. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone else fall. It's rising so completely that your previous life becomes unrecognizable, not because it was taken from you, but because you've outgrown it entirely. Eleanor had not only survived Richard's betrayal, she had transformed it into the catalyst for becoming the woman she was always meant to be. If this story of resilience and rediscovery touched your heart, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel for more tales of human transformation and unexpected second chances. Remember, sometimes what seems like an ending is actually the universe making room for a new and better beginning.